So, as a philosopher, I bet you've thought about this like a lot.
Hmm.
How we understand the world, like a simple thing, the apple falls from the tree.
Right.
But then there are these like way more complex things, how we understand justice or what grief even is.
Yeah.
Those feel so different to me. Like even the kind of knowing we end up with is different.
Oh, absolutely.
What do you think about that?
That's a great question, actually. It's something philosophers have been wrestling with for ages.
Right.
And that feeling you're talking about, how human experience needs a different approach than like explaining nature. That's what we're going to deep dive into today.
Yes, exactly. Wilhelm Dilthey, he's our guy. A big name in German philosophy, late 1800s, early 1900s.
Huge figure.
And we've been digging into this Stanford Encyclopedia philosophy entry on him.
Oh, it's a good one.
Really fascinating stuff.
It is.
So he lived 1833 to 1911, which puts him right in that post-Hegelian world.
Right in the thick of it.
And the entry makes it clear that his main goal was to kind of continue what Kant started.
Yeah, with the whole critique thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Kant's critique of pure reason was all about how we can know the natural world.
The limits of reason, all that.
But Dilthey wanted a critique of historical reason. Like, how do we know history? How do we know human experience?
It's a whole different ballgame.
Right. Totally. And he had this term for the human sciences, Geisteswissenschaften, history, literature, sociology, psychology.
All the stuff that deals with humans and their messy world.
And his point was you can't just take the methods from science and apply them to people.
It just doesn't work. Like you were saying, it's a different kind of knowledge.
Exactly. So Dilthey was all about finding a way of understanding that really fit the complexity of human experience and how we create culture and all that.
And you could definitely see Kant's influence in his thinking, but also Hegel's focus on history.
Yeah, but he wasn't into all the Hegelian metaphysics.
No, he steered clear of that.
Right. You can also see some Fichte and Herder in there, too.
Yeah.
The whole importance of the subjective and the historical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for you, our philosophy fans out there, today's mission is to really get Dilthey.
Get him, yeah.
Understand his main arguments, see how his thinking developed, and see how he influenced philosophy afterwards. Especially when it comes to history and how we understand things in general.
Right. Okay, so where do we even start with this guy?
Well, his early work, up to around 1887, you might surprise you a little, because he's so known for saying the human sciences are unique.
Right.
But early on, he actually tried to find lawful explanations for the human world, almost like in the natural sciences.
Really?
Yeah. In 1867, he gave this lecture where he said, philosophy is an experiential science of spiritual phenomena.
Okay.
And the goal was to find the laws that govern our social, intellectual, and moral lives.
So he was looking for those underlying rules.
Exactly. But even then, you can see how he's different.
How so?
Because he thought these systems, like art, religion, science, they all came from basic psychological laws and impulses.
Oh, so it's like those things come from our lived experience.
Yeah.
Exactly. He even imagined a new critique of reason based on these psychological principles.
Interesting. So even early on, he was thinking about how people actively shape their experience.
Totally. It's not just about passively observing the world. It's about how our minds work, how we interact with things.
And that connects to his later ideas about understanding.
Absolutely.
So did he actually come up with any of these laws?
He tried. In his 1887 book on poetics, he had these 3 laws of the imaginative metamorphosis.
Okay.
They're supposed to explain why poetry makes us feel uplifted. He said there's the law of exclusion, where we filter out stuff that's not relevant.
Okay.
Then there's intensification, where our current interests make us focus on certain parts of an image.
I see.
And finally, completion, where a powerful mind kind of fills in the gaps of an image based on their big life concerns.
So he's trying to find patterns in how we experience art.
Exactly. He wants to find that regularity.
But then his thinking shifts, right?
It does. As he kept looking at these laws, he realized something. That individual psychology wasn't enough. Our experience is shaped by history and society, too.
Ah, so it's not just about what's going on in our heads.
Right. It's about the bigger picture. He even said that our access to history feels more direct than our access to nature.
Interesting. What does that mean?
Well, we experience ourselves as part of this historical flow. We're not just separate individuals. We're connected to the past.
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense. And this leads to a change in how he thinks about inner experience, right?
Exactly. He moves away from Kant.
In what way?
Well, Kant thought the stuff in our minds was just phenomenal, just appearances shaped by our mental structures.
Okay.
But Dilthey starts to see Leibniz's lived experience as real. as a foundation for understanding.
So it's not just an illusion.
Right. It's the starting point. And time isn't just this abstract thing like Kant thought. It's what connects us to history. It's the medium of history.
Okay, so that brings us to his second phase in the 1890s.
Right, where he focuses on lived experience and how we can understand it directly.
This is where that famous distinction comes in, right?
Yes. Our Claren versus Verstine explanation versus understanding.
A big one, for sure. And it's all over his 1894 book, Ideas for a Descriptive and Analytic Psychology.
This distinction has been so influential, especially in the philosophy of social science.
So break it down for me.
Okay, so Dilthey says we explain things using our intellect. Yeah. We look for causes and make laws, like science does.
Okay, that's familiar.
But understanding Verstine is different and uses all our mental powers, not just logic.
So it's more holistic.
Exactly.
Or
And he says the human sciences are all about understanding the meaning of what people do.
not just why they do it.
Right. We want to get inside their heads, see things from their perspective.
And this connects to his ideas about how we experience the world, right?
Absolutely. In his 1890 essay on why we believe in the external world,
Yeah.
he says it's not because of logic. It's because we feel resistance to our will.
So like when I try to move something and it's heavy.
Exactly. That feeling tells us something is really there. It's not just an idea in our minds.
So lived experience is direct. It's not filtered through concepts.
Right? And it's full of values and meaning, things that matter to us.
This feels really different from how some philosophers talk about perception.
Oh, yeah. He's emphasizing feeling and immediate experience, which the encyclopedia points out is a big change from Hegel.
Who is all about concepts and the dialectic.
Exactly. Dilthey's more grounded in our actual experience.
I like that.
Yeah.
And during this time, he develops his descriptive and analytic psychology.
Right, where he focuses on how everything in our experience is connected.
Not just a bunch of separate thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. He sees it as a flow, a nexus of consciousness, psychischer Zusammenhang.
Okay.
And within this flow, he finds a pattern, a structure that's always there.
What is it?
This interplay of representing feeling and willing.
So thinking, feeling, and doing.
Yeah. It's happening all the time in every moment of our conscious lives.
And from this interconnectedness, he gets the idea of purposiveness.
So like Mesekite.
Yeah.
It's built into our psychic structure.
What does it even mean?
It's the way our drives our search for happiness and avoiding suffering are all linked.
So we're wired for purpose.
In a way, yes. But it's not a fixed purpose. It's more about adapting to life.
It's not like we're all working towards some big goal.
Right. It's more fluid than that. And he even questions the idea that the only goal of life is to become mature.
Interesting.
He thinks each moment has value in itself.
Makes sense. And how about individuality? How does he see that?
He says it's not about having a set of unique traits from birth.
It's not.
It's something we develop over time. He calls it the acquired psychic nexus.
So it's shaped by our experiences.
Exactly. Even if people have some similar traits, the way they combine and how strong they are makes each person unique.
So like someone might be shy, but also ambitious.
Exactly. And that combination shapes their character.
And this all ties in with the philosophical debates of his time, right?
Oh, yeah. He was arguing with the Neo-Kantians.
Like Windelband.
Exactly. Who said there's a hard line between the natural sciences and the historical sciences.
Because one looks for laws and the other looks for what's unique.
Right. But Dilthey thought they were connected. You need to understand the general to understand the individual.
Okay, so that brings us to his third phase, the final stage of his thinking.
From 1900 until his death in 1911. This is where he really dives into historical understanding and hermeneutics.
The art of interpretation.
Exactly. And this is where he faces the big challenge of figuring out how to understand the human world.
So what was his big breakthrough?
In his 1900 essay, The Rise of Hermeneutics, he realizes that just looking inside ourselves isn't enough.
What do you mean?
To really understand ourselves and others, we have to look at how we express ourselves in the world.
So our actions, our words, art, all of that.
Exactly. Those are our human objectifications.
Right.
And to understand them, we need interpretation.
It's like we're trying to read the signs of ourselves.
Yes. And this is where he brings back Hegel's idea of objective spirit, objective or Geist.
But he changes it, right?
He expands it. Hegel mostly talked about institutions like law and the state.
Okay.
But Dilthey includes all human creations. Art, religion, philosophy, customs, even daily life.
So objective spirit is everything we make and share as humans.
Exactly. And it's how we connect to the past,
Yeah.
is what makes history accessible to us.
So how do we interpret all of this?
That's where hermeneutics comes in. For Dilthey, it becomes the theory of how we understand any human expression.
Wow, that's a big task.
It is. And in his studies toward the foundation of the human sciences, he looks at how language works. He
Okay.
talks about attitudinal stances, like questioning, believing, desiring.
Those are like the ways our minds are directed towards the world.
Exactly. And he says these stances are expressed in language. He also makes a distinction between erkenntnis and wissen.
What are those?
Well, erkenntnis is like conceptual knowledge, the kind of knowledge we might use in science.
Right.
But wissen is more like judgmental, reflective knowledge.
Yeah.
It takes into account values, purposes, and the historical context.
So it's more appropriate for the human sciences.
Exactly, because it deals with things that are meaningful to us.
And this connects to his idea of Lebensbezug's life concerns, right?
Exactly. The things in the world are real and important to us because of how they relate to our lives.
So a tree isn't just a neutral object.
Right. It might be a source of shade or fruit or a place to climb for a child.
It has meaning within our lives.
Exactly. And he was influenced by Husserl's logical investigations here.
The phenomenologist.
Exactly. Dilthey was interested in how we grasp the meaning of words, how we understand each other.
And he also changes how he thinks about feelings, right?
It does this. He says they're not just subjective states. They're how we evaluate the world.
So they tell us if something is good or bad for us.
Exactly. If it helps or hinders our flourishing or offend.
Yeah.
And he sees willing as the intention to make something happen.
So our conscious pursuit of a goal.
Right. And
Uh-huh.
all of these ideas come together in his big 1910 book.
The formation of the historical world and the human sciences.
Exactly. This is where he applies his thinking to history itself.
Okay.
And he shifts away from purposive systems, Zweck system, which are like institutions with specific goals. He moves towards this broader idea of productive nexus or system, Wirkungszusammenhang.
That's a mouthful.
I know. But it's important. It means that history is this web of interconnected effects.
So it's not just a straight line of cause and effect.
Right. It's more complex than that.
Yeah.
And it focuses on how individuals, cultures, and institutions create meaning and value.
Through their interaction.
Exactly. He's still thinking about these collective entities.
Like the spirit of a people.
Right. But he's careful. He doesn't want to say it's some mystical being.
So how does he explain it?
He says it's a logical subject, a pattern of interaction and meaning-making that lasts longer than individuals.
But individuals are still important, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're not just cogs in a machine. They bring their whole lived experience to these interactions.
So it's both individual and collective.
Exactly. And he rethinks those purposive systems.
In what way?
He sees them as productive systems that express values and purposes.
Even if they don't achieve specific goals.
Right. And he classifies different kinds of life manifestations.
Uh-huh.
There's the theoretical concepts, judgments, the practical actions, decisions, and the disclosive expressions of lived experience like art.
Ah, so art is a way of showing our inner world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he says art can reveal more about human life than the artist's own life.
That's interesting.
He thinks art can tap into something universal.
So how do we understand all of this?
He makes a distinction between elementary understanding and higher understanding.
Okay.
Elementary understanding is based on the shared meanings we have in our culture.
Like the common sense stuff we pick up.
Exactly.
Okay.
But higher understanding is needed when things are more complex or unfamiliar.
Like when we're trying to understand something from a different culture or time period.
Exactly. Or like you said, a literary illusion that needs specific knowledge to get it.
And the highest form of understanding is re-experiencing Naturleben.
Exactly. It's not just about knowing the facts. It's about feeling what it was like.
Like putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
He uses the example of a lyrical poem. He says it lets us re-experience a whole nexus of lived experience. Maybe not the poet's exact experience, but something they created for us to feel.
So understanding involves both thinking and feeling.
Absolutely. And he applies this to how we understand history.
So history isn't just dates and events.
It's about understanding the forces that shape human lives, the values, the struggles.
And he wrote about this in his drafts for a critique of historical reason.
Which was published after his death.
Right. And in those drafts, he talks about time not just as a sequence, but as having quality.
And that leads to ideas of meaning, value, and purpose.
As well as how human agency and suffering are intertwined in history. It's not just a neutral chain of events.
Right. And he emphasizes the importance of autobiography and biography for understanding these historical connections.
Because they show us how individuals experience these larger forces.
Exactly. And he sees life itself as the ultimate context.
The horizon of all our experiences.
And he says values are produced within this historical context.
So they're not coming from some outside source.
Right? They emerge from our lived experience.
Okay, so beyond all the stuff about understanding, he also wrote about ethics.
He did. He has this book, System of Ethics, based on lectures from 1890.
And what's his approach?
It's a psychoethical approach
Yeah.
based on anthropology and history.
So looking at how humans actually behave.
Exactly. And he emphasizes our inner drives and the importance of group solidarity.
Our connection to others.
Exactly. He uses the term mitgefühl, which means fellow feeling.
And he distinguishes this from sympathy.
He does. He thinks fellow feeling is deeper. It's a sense of shared humanity.
So it's not just about feeling sorry for someone?
It's about recognizing our connection to them.
And he outlines 3 ethical incentives.
Yes, Wohlwollen, which is benevolence.
Oh, yeah.
Rechtschaffenheit, which is striving for what's right.
And Vollkommenheit, which is striving for self-perfection.
Right, but a socially legitimate kind of self-perfection.
Interesting. And this is where it gets tricky.
How so?
Because he's skeptical of transcendent values in history.
Right.
But he does seem to accept some moral judgments as unconditional and a priori.
It's a bit of a tension.
Yeah. And he also talks about worldviews, Weltanschauung.
Right, those big picture attempts to understand life.
He sees them as going beyond what the individual sciences can tell us.
Exactly. He analyzes different types of worldviews, like naturalism, idealism of freedom, and objective idealism.
And what's his conclusion?
He thinks they all have limits. He prefers literary and poetic expressions of worldviews.
Because they capture the complexity of human experience without claiming to know everything.
Exactly. And finally, we have to talk about Dilthey's influence.
Which is massive.
He influenced so many big thinkers. Husserl, Heidegger, Cassirer, Gadamer, Ricoeur.
The giants of 20th century philosophy.
Exactly. And it's interesting that people are now looking at how he influenced Carnap.
The logical positivist.
Exactly. Carnap was trying to get rid of metaphysics, and some people think Dilthey's empirical approach helped him.
And there was that whole debate about Verstehen.
Right. Some analytic philosophers thought it just meant empathy.
But that's not what Dilthey meant at all.
No. He meant something much more rigorous and deliberate.
A way of really understanding the meaning of human actions and expressions.
Exactly. So for you, our philosopher listeners out there, Dilthey's big contribution is this.
He showed how important the human sciences are.
And that they need their own methods.
He argued that understanding people requires more than just explaining their behavior.
It means taking into account their lived experience, their history, their culture.
And he helped develop hermeneutics as a way to interpret all the ways humans express themselves.
And at the heart of it all is this tension he was trying to resolve.
How do we bridge the gap between our own subjective experience and the possibility of objective understanding?
Especially in a world that's constantly changing and full of different cultures and perspectives.
Right. And that leads to a final thought for you to ponder.
Okay.
Dilthey said life is the ultimate context.
It's both open-ended and shaped by history.
So how does that change how we think about the big philosophical questions?
About ultimate reality and values.
Does focusing on historical understanding give us a better way to understand the human condition?
It's something worth thinking about.
It is. And we encourage you to explore Dilthey's work for yourself.
There's a lot to discover there.
And think about how his ideas about explanation and understanding are still relevant today.
Especially in all the debates about knowledge and what it means to be human.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Wilhelm Dilthey.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep thinking.
And keep questioning.